We interrupt this program from Lane Community College to bring you this breaking news story from TIBC, Truth in Broadcasting Corporation, from our world corporate headquarters in a secure underground location in Area 51 in Nevada. I'm Dick Veneer, your glib and banal anchor of Facade News, the 24/7 newscast that keeps you in the dark, without fear or favor. We go directly to the surface of a story, and we stay there. No one can challenge our award-winning, in-shallow reporting. We're dedicated to the highest standards of journalism. Our credos, unfair and unbalanced. We deceive, you believe. Ladies and gentlemen, an amazing story coming across our news desk from an obscure radio station, KRAP, is reporting that Ben Bernanke, Hank Paulson, Alan Greenspan, Tim Geithner, Larry Summers, Lord Blankfein, and other government officials and bankers have been arrested for financial crimes against the American people. They were found under a huge mattress in downtown Eugene with trillions of dollars in cash, a stash of World Federation DVDs, and a massive collection of Kenny G and Barry Manilow CDs, and scores of empty Papa John's pizza boxes. They were taken into custody by a heretofore unknown group calling itself ELF, the Eugene Liberation Front. Marion, a spokesperson for this group, who refused to give her last name, said, "This action is long overdue. We're dedicated to nonviolence and did not use force, but we had to act. We could no longer wait for Congress or the Justice Department to enforce the law. They must face justice," she said with her voice rising in indignation. The prisoners, handcuffed in orange jumpsuits and with black cloaks over their heads, were later reported to have defiantly shouted at their captors, "Do you know who we are? We rule the world." And then, inexplicably, many of them burst into tears and said, "I want my mommy." If convicted, they will serve time at Guantanamo. You will recall the infamous former U.S. prison that was returned to Cuban sovereignty late in 2012. It looks like curtains for the former masters of the universe. Their heads were bowed as they were led away by blue-helmeted peacekeepers of ELF, the Eugene Liberation Front, headed by Commander Zupan, who would not give his first name. I'm Dick Veneer, your still glib and banal anchor of Facade News. Stay tuned to TIBC, Truth in Broadcasting Corporation, for updates on this breaking news story. Remember, we deceive, you believe. You either watch our news or you will be watched. Now back to our regularly scheduled program at Lane Community College in Eugene. Well, good morning, brothers and sisters, comrades, ladies and gentlemen, Hazrat Khovatin, brothers and sisters. It's great to be here. It's been several hours. I don't know how many of you were here last night. There was another David Barsamian here. I understand he gave a talk, but I couldn't make it myself. But thank you for coming. Alternative radio can be heard locally on KLCC Tuesday evenings at 6:30, and you can see the homepage website. I want just to let you know, and particularly for the younger people in the audience, I started this project in Boulder in the late 70s, went national, international in the mid-80s. I don't have any academic credentials. In other words, I have no background or training from what I'm doing, which I think is I'm not saying this like to boast, but for this kind of work, you don't need special training. You need be inquisitive, you need to be dedicated, you need to be skeptical of people with political and economic power because you know you're going to be, spun like crazy with their propaganda messages. So this is a kind of work that literally anyone can do. And I have a very unusual, I know the talk is about fantasies of capitalism, I have a very unusual business model. I decided when I began alternative radio, because of the nature of the content, rather left of center, that I wouldn't charge I wouldn't charge the public radio stations anything to carry the program. Now this is the exact opposite of what all the other content providers, as they're called, including National Public Radio and others, even Democracy Now! You have to sign contracts up front, you have to pay money up front. I decided I'm going to offer it for free and get on as many stations as I can because I didn't want to give them the opportunity to say, well, we really admire your work and respect what you're doing, but our budget's a little tight this year. So I just pulled that, from under them and offered the program for free. And so it isn't, it's not anything noble. It was just an idea I had to break through the silences that are so constricting public discourse in the United States. And we've seen over the last 15 or 20 years how public radio in particular has narrowed the spectrum in terms of voices that are allowed to appear. And ideally, for the communication needs of a democratic society, no matter what your political persuasion may be, you should have a range of opinion from A to Z. And now we've got pretty much A to B, and even that's getting tighter. It's got more like A to A squared in terms of limiting those voices. And to hear the voices that alternative radio gets on, you see some of the photos up there, and you may know of my work with Noam Chomsky, How the World Works. I was just up in British Columbia as well as Alberta, doing work on the tar sands. That'll be broadcast next month. Michael Moore, Get Up, Stand Up. Peter Balakian, Genocide and Modernity. All of these programs that come your way each and every week on KLCC. So it's an unusual project, not only for its content, but because of the choice I made to offer it free. So the only source of income is directly from listeners who buy CDs, hint, and or books, and that's it. So there's no magic. I wouldn't recommend that you, for the younger people in the audience thinking of a career in dentistry or neurosurgery, to wing it the way I winged it in doing radio. It's a slightly different discipline, and you do need technical training for those particular fields. But otherwise, feel free to dive in. And I jokingly tell people the only blemish on my resume is the year I spent at San Francisco State College before dropping out. I wish I hadn't gone at all. I was bored to death. And I barely graduated from high school in New York, having to go to summer school to make up courses. So I've brought a pack of 6 CDs. Gar Alperovitz, who's up there, the first on the top left, New Economic Paradigm, Maud Barlow, Not a Drop to Drink. She's a Canadian woman, just a terrific voice on the water crisis. Michael Parenti, The Pathology of Work, Richard Wolff, The Tax Code, and a 2-part interview with Chomsky on unconventional wisdom. If you were to get these from me directly from Boulder, it would be something like $90, but today it's only $30. So I want you to get these, make copies, burn them. I don't care about copyright. Get the word out to as many people as you possibly can. And I'm going to hand out a mailing list for those of you who didn't sign up last night if you want to find out more about alternative radio. Just need your name and your email. Forget about the address because Homeland Security already has that. Please print clearly because the people in Washington have trouble with complicated names and letters. So I'm going to send this around, and I should have a pen here for those of you who didn't sign last night. please sign up today, and I should get my notes. This is a terrific conference, and again, you know, hats off to Stan Taylor and the crew that put this together. It's you know, just a great number of voices, and through the good offices of my comrade here, Comrade Nat, of Third Eye Video, hopefully some of these will be broadcast on alternative radio in the coming weeks and months. So we're talking about the fantasies of capitalism, which I think are difficult to separate without talking about imperialism and U.S. Foreign policy as well, and some of the, you know, the myths of capitalism, as Margaret Thatcher, not Meryl Streep, said there is no alternative when she was asked in the 1980s, while she was trashing the safety net in Britain, that there is TINA, there is no alternative. Well, if there is no alternative, then the game is over. And if we're simply going to deal with cosmetic changes and a little tinkering around the edges here and there, it's not going to work, because the planet is basically in the ICU in very critical condition. There's still a pulse, there's still a heartbeat. I say this because it's, you know, Earth Day weekend, and there's a little bit of consciousness about the issue again, and then it, you know, and then it disappears. And I know Eugene, like Boulder, is very much a green community and recycles, and people drive Priuses, or sometimes people call them sarcastically Piuses, you know. But it's still carbon monoxide, you know, to some extent. It's still a car. It's still part of the same old, and simply, as noble as it is, and I do it, you know, recycle plastic and paper and glass and all of that, and compost. Yes, we do all the other things. It is not, these were simply moving deck chairs on the Titanic. You know, as the ship goes, you know, and we just passed the 100th anniversary of that particular event, there's not a sense of urgency at all in the political class that rules the country, you know, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, about the environmental crisis. They seem to be satisfied with making a few, as I said, cosmetic changes, but not going to fundamental structures. And as I said at the City Club yesterday, this is the rotten apples versus rotten barrel approach to dealing with the economic and environmental crisis. And you cannot separate them as we burn more and more fossil fuels, as the tar sands in northern Alberta, which is the single greatest pollution-producing project in the world today, and it's very likely that the Keystone XL pipeline, which was temporarily put on hold by Obama. Why? Because 12,000 people turned out at the White House and encircled it last summer, and 1,000 people were arrested. And so, again, that heat in the street has an impact. But let's see what happens after the November election. It's a slam dunk that if Romney is elected, that he is going to okay it. But it's not at all clear what Obama is going to do about the tar sands. So it's something that we need, I think, to pay attention to. And that, I thought that was a significant victory. You know, well, the left is always doom and gloom, and comrades, things are bad. They're worse than bad. But, you know, there's also been some good news from the front. The Keystone Project, at least, was delayed, put on hold. A tremendous thing happened in Wisconsin in the dead of winter. And any of you who've been to Wisconsin knows what that means. 1 million signatures were collected to recall the governor, Scott Walker there, who had passed a number of, you know, anti-union, anti-organizing pieces of legislation. And that election for his recall, as well as some other Wisconsin legislators, is coming up in the next month or two, I believe, maybe early June, if I'm not mistaken, June 5th, yeah. And so that was I think, something very positive. And let's not forget what happened in Chicago. Obama had to move the whole G20 to Camp David, which is like a fortress, because of the threat of mass demonstrations. May 20th, it was around that time, in Chicago. People here are not old enough to remember 1968 and what Chicago... One person, okay. One person, all right. There's always... Come on. You can't fool me. There's always one person in the group that raises their hand, usually a plant. But the Democrats remember very well what happened in 1968, and they did not want a repetition. Now, the NATO summit, NATO now being a kind of an appendage to the Pentagon, it's really like a French foreign legion. It does some of the imperial cleanup work. Of course, the main work is left to the global hegemon, that's the United States. But NATO has useful, it can bomb Yugoslavia, which cannot bomb back. It can bomb Bosnia, Libya, maybe they'll get involved in Syria now. So NATO has this kind of appendage role to make the Europeans kind of, feel good that they're participating in the global empire as, I would say lieutenants to the main master in Washington. So the NATO summit is coming up in May, on May 20th, and there promises to be major demonstrations in Chicago. And of course, our fabulous Occupy movement, which is a game changer. It has really changed the game. It has put the power elites, the people, what do I mean by that? I know it's not, it's not a fashionable term. C. Wright Mills, a great sociologist at Columbia in New York, Columbia University, I first used that term, the power elite. Basically the people who own and run the society. Not the people, not us, but the handful, the 1%, who do own most of the wealth in this country. And I always make a distinction, as Richard Wolff does in Occupy the Economy. There's a difference between income inequality and wealth inequality. And that difference is night and day. Income inequality, okay, let's say we both earn $40,000 a year. That's our wage. And that's all you have. But I have, in addition to that, my homes in Gstaad, Switzerland, Aspen, Colorado. I have stocks, I have bonds, I have hedge fund interest, I have golf club memberships, I have private jets, I have, swimming pool, rec center memberships. All of these things constitute wealth, which is not considered income. Now that gap is so acute that it's simply off the charts. It's way beyond simple income inequality. So to talk about, well, the CEOs are earning too much money and their bonuses are obscene, and they are, I think somewhat misses the point, because it's in fact this wealth inequality which is untaxed. By the way, and just to give you another example of what it means to be part of the 1%, on a daily basis, I take my friends out and we have $1,500 lunches, modest, at the most expensive restaurants in Eugene or Boulder or New York, and I write that off as a tax deduction because I say, well, I was talking to him about business issues. But if you go down and have a slice of pizza, you can't write that off your taxes. So the whole tax code, and as Chomsky says, for 30 years now, there has been unrelenting class war on the American people, on you, on us. Let's not make it abstract. And Occupy is the first pushback to that unrelenting class war. And the tax code itself is the blunt instrument in which this inequality enables that kind of inequality. Again, if you're rich and famous, you hire high-priced accountants and lawyers to work the system, to game the system, to figure out, what the loopholes are, how I can avoid paying taxes. There was this one firm, actually I learned this from David K. Johnson, former New York Times reporter who's written a book on the tax code. One corporation, I just learned it was Ingersoll Rand. It used to be the Rand Corporation, now it's Ingersoll Rand. Paid $26,000 a year to maintain a P.O. box, a post office box in Bermuda as its legal headquarters. Now, why would it do that? If they're in the U.S., why would they have a P.O. box in Bermuda? Well, that little trick saved them $40 million in corporate taxes. It's not bad. And you can afford to pay your accountant and lawyer who worked the system, maybe $400,000 or $500,000 in fees, and then you've walked away with $39,500,000. That does pay for a few lattes and cappuccinos. Taxes on the wealthy used to be high. Again, people here don't remember Dwight David Eisenhower, by today's standards, a radical president, way off on the left, who talked about the military-industrial complex. Well, during Eisenhower's presidency from 53 to 61, the tax rate on the haves was 91%. Today, it's a third of that, and very few people are paying 33 or 34 or 35%. In fact, it's probably under 20%. I think Romney is paying somewhere around 17%. So again, the unfairness of the system, I think, is one of the reasons the Occupy movement had to happen. There had to be a response from the people to being constantly plummeted, they would see their incomes and wages plummeting and being constantly pummeled, being beaten over the head time and time again. And so you saw this literally a spontaneous movement, provoked by a call from a very small circulation but influential British Columbia magazine called Adbusters. It rose up on September 17th, and it has, as I said, has been a game changer. The tax code today, as I said, is a principal weapon of class warfare. And in a true Orwellian fashion, if you raise these issues, you're accused of class warfare. Just as since people use socialism in this country as a very derogatory and derisive term, someone like Barack Obama, who may propose some very modest reforms on the edge, is somehow labeled a socialist. Again, if you believe pigs fly, then you believe these things too. In a time of economic crisis where we have a media propaganda system, we have an educational system that doesn't educate, magical thinking also enters the fray, and that's why you see on the edges of our culture various religious fundamentalist groups, other groups that I would just describe as maybe fascistic, racist. Why should I just describe? That's what they are. The anti-immigrant movement in the country is about scapegoating immigrants. It's about getting people's attention down, looking down at the most disadvantaged and the worst off elements, and not to pay attention to what's going on above, to the 1% that are actually controlling the economy. So that's their strategy. That's what they're trying to do. Don't worry about these things. Worry about the Ducks. Worry about the Seattle Seahawks, or who's going to be the first-round draft pick in next week's NFL draft. Focusing on, that's why I call the media a weapon of mass distraction. And if we should have a scroll on TV, every time you see CNN or any of these all of them, CBS, MSNBC, without exception, there should be a scroll, just like there's a message on cigarette packs. If you watch this or listen to this, it's dangerous to your health. It can cause cancer. It can cause migraine headaches, etc. And then I think that would help our citizens to better understand, look, we're getting fed a bunch of crap, and it will help us to decipher and decode the propaganda. From the boarded-up storefronts to foreclosed homes to the homeless and unemployed, the signs of decay in the United States are all too apparent. The political class, pretending to care about the 99%, have little to offer beyond boilerplate rhetoric. You know, we all have to take the tough medicine. All right, we take the tough medicine, you know, like they're forcing down the throats of the Greeks and the Portuguese and the Spaniards and people in this country. Tough medicine, austerity. Are they having that tough medicine? Hardly at all. They just prescribe to others. We hear about the virtues of hard work. If only there was work to be had. There are at least 15 million people out of work, and if you count the number of our fellow citizens who have part-time jobs, who would like full-time jobs, who have dropped out of the labor market, simply given up. And I can tell you from my own personal experience knowing people that people who are, let's say, over 40, 45, have great difficulty in finding another job unless they're willing to work, you know, be a greeter at Walmart, or a cashier at Target, you know, or a bagger at Safeway. You know, if you want to enter the job market, you know, making minimum wage jobs, I know Oregon's a little bit higher than the federal $7.25, which is, you know, literally nothing, then those are the jobs that are available. So if you would take all of those things in aggregate, the actual unemployment figures are somewhere around 25 million. It's very, very high. In actual numbers, it exceeds the numbers of people who were out of work during the Great Depression, simply because the population was so much lower then. There were more people percentage-wise out of work, something like 25% in the 1920s and 1930s. But today, the number is much higher because of the population. So the actual figure of 8.5%, 9% is totally misleading. Furthermore, you have to be collecting unemployment insurance to be in that cohort. So if your benefits run out, as they do after a year and a half, they've been extended to some extent, that's it. You're no longer counted. And that too is not being factored in to the so-called recovery, which is showing signs of fraying at the edges. And if Greece does in fact go belly up and declare bankruptcy and go back to the drachma and come out of the Eurozone, the whole economic system may be in for a huge shock. So this is now already, since 2007, when this economic crisis started, the longest such downturn, use that euphemism, crash, since the Great Depression of the 1930s. FDR, he was a president of the United States. He did devise a program, the New Deal, to put people back to work. Not a stimulus package for the banks, who Roosevelt denounced as economic royalists, and using, you know, very, very strong language. The government managed to create almost 12 million jobs between 1934 and the beginning of World War II. That was, you know, through the NRA, the WPA, the CCC. Some of the things that we take for granted were created at the height of the Great Depression, like Social Security. What a concept. People, when they're old, when they retire, should have some money coming in, money that they've put into the system by working, to look after themselves in retirement. The minimum wage, unemployment insurance, all of these things were created as part of the New Deal. And it has been scripture for the radical right in this country to roll back all aspects of the New Deal. They regard it, you know, if you follow Friedrich Hayek and Ayn Rand and Milton Friedman and Alan Greenspan, you know, this is anathema to the workings of a free market. The government should not interfere. They want social Darwinism. Everybody is their own island. You're completely unconnected to anything and to anyone. Do what, do your own thing. Max out money as much as you can for yourself. Don't worry about anybody else. And so it's a vision of the world that I find particularly ugly and anti-humanitarian, this kind of social Darwinism. And you see it coming up and repeated in many, many ways. Like that well-known substance, capitalism has hit the fan. The statistics are numbing and do not convey the suffering and trauma citizens are enduring. Gone up in smoke are savings, pensions, homes, and jobs. Poverty is at record levels. Child poverty. I mean, here we are in the richest country supposedly in the world, where millions and millions of kids are living in poverty, and that means malnutrition, and with all the attendant health effects that has. For too many, dreams and hopes are shattered. And like the Howard Beale character in the movie Network, people are yelling, "I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore." Occupy Wall Street has gone global. People are in the streets saying, "Basta, enough." There's widespread recognition that the economic crash is not just the result of greed and arrogance and lax regulation. That's the media spin. That's the ruling class spin. These, Bernie Madoff types and, Gordon Geckos who manipulated the subprime mortgages, they were the ones that caused all of this. And we just need to get those few miscreants, behind bars, not the big boys, of course, but get them behind bars, and then everything will be hunky-dory. We'll pass a little reform legislation. Gee, that was terrible that Clinton abolished the Glass-Steagall Act. It was terrible about NAFTA. It's terrible about all the outsourcing that's going on. Let's get those great American manufacturing jobs, which had pensions and health care and days off and paid sick leave. Anybody old enough to remember those things? They are now dreams for young people. The people that are fueling this movement, the Occupy movement, can't even imagine a job with those kinds of things which another generation kind of took for granted when there was a powerful union movement in this country that enabled those things to happen. Even though union membership in the United States never exceeded 36 or 37% of the workforce, the ripple effect of those contracts and what they injected into the public discourse helped everyone. So that's why, we have the weekend, like the bumper sticker says. The union movement, like the New Deal, has been systematically eroded, eviscerated, and attacked. We have, legislation passed in the states making it very difficult for workers to organize in unions. First, you had the flight from the Rust Belt, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, etc., Pennsylvania, first to the southern states where there were no unions. Then they abandoned the southern states too, to a great extent, and have gone to Bangladesh and to Pakistan and to other low-wage countries where there's a race to the bottom. Why? It's not because these guys are mean, the people who own the country. It's what capitalism is about. It's about maximizing profit. It's not a social welfare system. It's not about being kind to your friends and being nice to your neighbors. It's about making money. And they are completely dedicated to maximizing profit, no matter what the cost. There's a, whoops, sorry, Noam Chomsky, falling to the ground there. There's a great cartoon in the New Yorker that Michael Parenti brought to my attention. It's a CEO who's got his stockholders. It's a meeting, and he's talking about prospects and investments, and he says to the assembled stockholders. Let me see if I can find the exact quote. No, I can't, but I'll paraphrase it. He says, "While the long-term prospects for environmental catastrophe are extreme and will cause massive suffering, in the short term, opportunities for profits are very rosy." and there's a cheer from the assembled masses. Now listen actually to what he's saying. The planet is doomed, but we're going to make a killing until that happens. And what happens to the children and the grandchildren down the line who have to face the music? That's their problem. Meanwhile, I'm maximizing profits. So in a bizarre and grotesque way, the system does work. Capitalism does work for the owners of the system. They are making money hand over fist, while the rest of us, and particularly the environment, face greater and greater difficulty. And you can't underscore the role of the media in terms of, I hate to use a word like informing, or maybe misinforming is better, the American public. Because when I travel a lot outside the country, and people ask me, they're kind of incredulous, do Americans really believe that stuff, that they're hearing? Because they can't, and they look at these like the Republican primary. I mean, I was in Canada during a lot of that, and people were like laughing, like, who are these clowns? It's very apparent from outside what's going on inside the United States. It's much more difficult here because of the propaganda machine. And Edward Bernays, who's like the father of propaganda, he said that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. Edward Bernays, incidentally, was a two-time nephew of Sigmund Freud. He knew something about psychology, about repetition, about massaging the message and the control and the manipulation of the public mind. Most people think of propaganda, they immediately go into Goebbels and Hitler. In fact, Goebbels and Hitler learned from Edward Bernays and other American liberal propagandists like Harold Laswell, like Walter Lippmann, and others that formed the Creel Commission during World War I, also called the Committee on Public Information, a very Orwellian term. What was that about, and why is it important? Woodrow Wilson, a liberal Democrat, once again, was elected president in 1916 on the platform of keeping the United States out of war. And he appointed this commission as soon as he was elected. Can you believe this? Presidents get elected and then they don't fulfill their promises? I know, it's hard to believe. But it did happen, at least on this one occasion that we know about. And Wilson went right to work on manipulating the American people to drive them into war. So there was a huge campaign led by Edward Bernays and these other liberal intellectuals to manufacture consent. There was cartoons of German soldiers throwing babies up in the air and bayoneting them. All of these total fabrications about German atrocities and about how terrible they were. Very much like the incubator story in Kuwait in 1990, which whipped up war frenzy here in the United States. Totally invented, like Jessica Lynch story. Like the statue of Saddam Hussein being torn down in Baghdad by supposedly, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. There were only 150 Iraqis there, and most of them were paid and from outside the country, but the media didn't report that. And so why did Wilson all of a sudden go back on his pledge of keeping the United States out of World War I? This, again, will come as a shock to you. Banks. I know. I'm glad you're all sitting down. The big financial banks in Paris and London owed billions of dollars to the banks in New York. And it looked like in 1916, 1917, that Germany was going to win the war. Germany wins the war, those banks don't get paid off. And that's exactly what happened. Wilson engineered the US into the war, and the New York banks were paid off. So these bailouts that you saw in 2008, 2009 are nothing new. They're as old as the hills when it comes to really existing capitalism. Which brings me to some of the core material which I want to talk to you about, and that is the fantasies of capitalism. Because we're all, we're brought up with all of this, Horatio Alger, work hard, nose to the grindstone, work on weekends, work, 2 jobs and all of that, and you will succeed. Well, the fact of the matter is that the system itself is heavily subsidized. First of all, you have the socialization of risk. By that, all the development that happens at the National Institutes of Health, where vaccines and medicines are invented and then are miraculously, and this is a miracle, given over to the big pharmaceutical companies. That's a gift from you, the taxpayer, from us, to the pharmaceutical companies. Now, maybe you're feeling very generous. Maybe you feel those pharmaceutical and corporations are not making enough money. But this is a gift from the taxpayer. Now, you're enjoying, a satellite technology and GPS and cell phones and the internet. Well, where did that come from? Also a gift from the American taxpayer through a program at the Pentagon called DARPA. It's an acronym, D-A-R-P-A, which invented the internet and computers. So all of that technology then, somehow, because, again, the American people are so generous, hand this over to Bill Gates and to, all the other people that are benefiting from the internet and cell phone technology. You have, I think, more people know about the socialization of the sports stadium in the United States, where sports teams, which are also corporations, shake down communities. If I don't get a new stadium in Denver, I'm moving to Kansas City, where the people there have promised me a new, $500 million stadium with tax breaks, with free infrastructure, with new highways going in, with free parking lots where I can keep, not free, they'll build, the city will build a parking lot, we'll keep all the revenue, and those kinds of things is another example of really existing capitalism, playing off communities, shaking them down. It's, what the mafia would call a shakedown operation, bribery. You do this for me or I'm out of here. I don't know if that happens in Eugene with the Ducks and the athletic program here. Probably not because, but, I understand that Philip Knight has some influence here. Am I right about that? And then the other thing, of course, is avionics. Where did that come? Another Pentagon program, radar, jet planes, all of that technology developed at taxpayers' expense at the military, at the Pentagon, and then handed over to corporations to maximize profits. So, and whenever there's a crisis, of course, then you privatize the profits when there's profits to be made, and you socialize the costs when things go into the red. That's what the bailout is all about. Did the banks give us money when they were making lots of money? Of course not. They kept all the money and gave it to their shareholders as dividends, as profits. But when they run into trouble, then we, the people, enter in and bail them out. So I think, again, that was a fundamental reason that the Occupy movement simply had to happen. It had no organic choice. It was a natural thing that came out of the ground. This is unfair. I don't have a PhD in economics from Harvard. I can figure this stuff out for myself. The rich are getting richer. I'm getting poorer. The people I know are getting poorer. It's as simple as that. The system is rigged, and it's time to change the system. And that's what Occupy is about. And again, going back to, FDR, who, did a lot of things in the 1930s, he said, and I'm quoting from the Overrule the Court pamphlet here, which moved to amend. David Cobb and Catlin are here talking about that this weekend. The liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of a private power to the point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in essence, is fascism. And this is FDR talking about the growth of private power when it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself is fascism. And I think it was Mussolini, no Democrat he, who said something very similar to that in the 1920s. He said, you know, the perfect kind of fascism is a melding of democratic rhetoric with actual concentrations of power. And we've seen now, you know, those kinds of mergers and takeovers and concentrations in all sectors of the U.S. economy. The banks that benefited from the bailout and continue to benefit from those kinds of economic policies from the Fed and the Department of Treasury under Geithner, they have now limited. There are now 4 or 5 banks that tower over the landscape. Just as in other sectors, there are just very, very few. There's media corporations. When I started alternative radio, one of the reasons I started it was I read a book by Ben Bagdikian, a journalist formerly with the Washington Post. He wrote a book called The Media Monopoly, and I'll be talking more about media on Tuesday at Harris Hall in Lane County building at 7 o'clock, I think, this coming Tuesday. He wrote a book in the, I think, early 80s called The Media Monopoly. He said there were 50 corporations that control most of the media in the United States. And he was the first person to draw attention to this. He said, you know, this is not good. This kind of concentration does not serve the communication needs of a democratic society. Well, he wrote a whole series of other editions. And let me just run it down for you. 50 became 28, 28 became 23, 23 became 14, 14 became 10, 10 became 6, and now there are 5 media conglomerates that basically control what people see, hear, and read. Very, very dangerous, I think, to have that kind of concentration, and we see that, you know, across the board. And again, I think the Occupy movement has recognized this, has created its own newsletters, its own independent media, because we cannot expect coverage from, you know, the corporations. First of all, they ignore you. You know, then they deride you and insult you. Oh, these are a bunch of hippies. These are like, they're reliving Woodstock. There's a bunch of, you know, old people smoking weed, or young people that are looking to score and make out and yada, yada, yada. And yes, aren't they dirty? They're so, this is the first time I ever heard, you know, state officials worried about public health. While, you know, 50 million... It doesn't bother them that 50 million Americans have no health coverage. It doesn't bother them that in New York City, in Boulder, Colorado, in Santa Monica, and in other places in the country, there are people sleeping in the streets. You know, that doesn't constitute a public health hazard. That's not something to be ashamed of. But the fact that there's an encampment and there may be, you know, some paper, you know, strewn about, that's a public health hazard. And they were worried about the safety of women. Whoa, the safety of women. You know, there isn't a second that goes by that a woman is not molested in this country. So these were all false, you know, excuses to deride a movement that that took them totally by surprise. You know, they think you know, the masters of the universe, the smartest guys in the room, they think they know everything and know what's going on. But this came out of left field and took them completely by surprise. So first, the media ignored them. There's nothing happening. Then it was derided. Oh, these are, you know, a bunch of hippies reliving Woodstock, yada, yada, yada. And then the attacks came, you know, of the health issues and sanitation. They're worrying about sanitation. And the tents are not... what did they call them? Not proper structures for people to sleep in. Well, what about sleeping in doorways and in city parks all over Boulder, Colorado? You know, near the library, near the creek in Boulder. There's a huge army of people sleeping out. I mean, I've been in Boulder for 34 years now. In winter, because it's cold winters, people move out to Arizona, to Nevada, to warmer places, New Mexico, and California. Not this year. There's no room there. So there's, you know, more and more people who are homeless. And this is not considered a shanda. This is not considered, that's Yiddish for a shame. This is not considered something that needs public attention. Instead, we get, lectures about, putting your nose to the grindstone and working hard. And yes, it's tough medicine, but we're Americans. We can pull through it. Well, the history of capitalism in the United States is the American people constantly supporting the capitalist system, through these systems of devices that I've mentioned, subsidies and tax loopholes, the tax code, etc. And a political class that is dedicated to doing that. So there's, a lot more to say about these particular things. I think, the book Occupy the Economy does speak to a lot of these issues, as well as the Chomsky book that I have here. It's always good to look at the Wall Street Journal, a well-known left-wing Marxist-Leninist newspaper owned by Rupert Murdoch. I mean, do I have to say anything? How over the top is he? He's like to the left of Noam Chomsky. And this is just, yesterday's headlines about, economic reports fan fears that there's going to be yet another double-dip recession. Well, this is the weakest recovery ever seen in a series of recessions or economic downturns or whatever euphemism you want to use since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And in terms of intensity and length of economic decline, this is the longest of any of them. And so 1 in 5 people who have mortgages are underwater. There's more and more, fears about the economic recovery, again, going into a downturn, sluggish home sales, job pictures dim, and if Greece goes bankrupt, it's very likely to set off a whole chain reaction of, economic decline. Meanwhile, meanwhile on Channel 12, the Imperial War Machine goes on its way like it's a parallel universe. Recently, our country or their country, I never know what pronoun to use, because sometimes I feel it's like it's their country and we're just cannon fodder here. We're supposed to sit around, watch TV, share emails, and do little or nothing else. Again, fortunately, Occupy is giving us something to do. Obama has now declared, Australia as a strategic ally of the United States and has sent 2,500 Marines to a new base in Darwin, Australia. Why? Because China is a great threat to Australia. I follow quite a bit of the international news, and I read as much about China as I possibly can. As far as I know, China has not even hinted at threatening Australia. But again, this war machine goes on totally irrational, totally not at all paying attention to what's going on in the rest of the economy. So there are two separate economies. There's the economy for us, and then 3 separate economies. There's the economy for the 1%, and then there's the Imperial War Machine economy, which if you're a part of, if you're Raytheon or Boeing or Northrop Grumman or Lockheed, it's high times. Weaponry is extremely capital intensive. It's not labor intensive. Another lie which the media conveniently covers up whenever it can. Oh, this will be great for jobs, this new F-35, or let's build another, aircraft carrier or a submarine in Connecticut or an aircraft carrier in Mississippi, and that will help jobs. There are very few jobs in those particular projects. It's capital intensive, not labor intensive. And so we have this, the US has this 735 bases around the world. It's now like a necklace surrounding China. Before it was surrounding the Soviet Union. Now the new containment policy is to contain China because China is showing, very aggressive actions. It wants to assert itself in Asia. That was a New York Times headline recently. Imagine that, an Asian country wanting of 1+ billion people wants to assert itself. It wants to have an economic and cultural presence in the continent in which it resides. Imagine that. Imagine the arrogance of the Chinese. But it's only the masters in Washington who can control the 7 seas and the 7 continents, who declare the whole world a national interest of the United States. And that is, I think, there are few propaganda terms that are more decisive in manufacturing consent than the national interest. Whenever you hear any president of any stripe, Reagan, Nixon, Carter, Obama, Clinton, whichever one you want to, pick your cyanide, pick your poison, they all utter this term, well, it's in the national interest. And then, oh, gee, I feel a lot better. Some people in Eugene are benefiting from this, people in Boulder, people in Springfield, in Dexter, in Florence, all over the United States. But what, in fact, is the national interest? It's used in a very specific way. And Joseph Schumpeter was an Austrian sociologist who wrote an essay called The Sociology of Imperialisms. And every time you hear the word Rome, or Roman, just insert the United States or American, and I think you'll get the drift of what Schumpeter was hinting at. There was no corner of the world where some interest was not alleged to be in danger or under actual attack. If the interests were not Roman, they were of Rome's allies. And if Rome had no allies, they would be invented. When it was utterly impossible to contrive such an interest, then it was the national honor that was insulted. The fight was always invested with an aura of legality. Rome was always being attacked by evil-minded neighbors. The whole world was pervaded by a host of enemies, and it was manifestly Rome's duty to guard against their aggressive designs. And that's the imperial military system that exists outside the United States, that is eviscerating the population here at home. But I also want to say that even if it weren't eviscerating, pauperizing the people here at home, it would be utterly immoral, because the suggestion is, well, if there was lots of money, then we can afford these gold-plated weapon systems and 12 aircraft carrier battle groups. No other country even has 1 aircraft carrier battle group. The United States has 12. Now, that doesn't just mean the aircraft carrier with all its jet planes and the helicopters and the destroyers and the submarines and the mines. That's what minesweepers. That's what an aircraft carrier battle group is. And the U.S. is patrolling the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf right now, threatening Iran. All options are on the table, all the guns pointed at Iran, while declaring that Iran is a threat to the peace. I think the people in the Middle East and in South Asia have a different view of that indeed. So I think I want to close with some poetry, because I was told that poetry is a very effective way to restore the human heart and to restore vision and to salve the wounds. And there's a couple of poems here. I know I'm going to find them in just a moment. One of them is by, oh my goodness, how embarrassing. It is also Earth Day. Dick Veneer. Yeah. For those of you who were here last night, I read the Urdu poem by Faiz Ahmed Faiz called Bol. I won't repeat that one. But this is something the great Indian writer with whom I've had the privilege of working with, Arundhati Roy, had to say 10 years ago in a talk she gave in Santa Fe. It's not poetry per se, but she is a very poetic writer, and she is able to impart such fragrance and grace to all of her constructions. So every sentence is like a bouquet. And I hope you read Arundhati Roy. She wrote The God of Small Things in the late 1990s. She's since gone on to become, I believe, the most compelling writer in English of political essays. And so she said this in Santa Fe in 2002. Fortunately, power has a shelf life. When the time comes, maybe this mighty empire will, like others before it, overreach itself, and implode from within. It looks as though structural cracks have already appeared. As the war against terror casts its net wider and wider, America's corporate heart is hemorrhaging. 2002. For all the endless empty chatter about democracy, today the world is run by three secretive institutions: the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization, all of which in turn are dominated by the United States. Nobody knows anything about them. Nobody elected them. Nobody said that they could make decisions on our behalf. A world run by a handful of greedy bankers and CEOs who nobody elected can't possibly last. Soviet-style communism failed. American-style capitalism, market capitalism, will also fail. The time has come, the walrus said. Perhaps things will get worse and then better. Perhaps there's a small God up in heaven readying herself for us. Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. Maybe many of us won't be here to greet her, but on a quiet day, if I listen very carefully, I can hear her breathing. Arundhati Roy. Time for one more poem? Yeah. Marge Piercy from The Moon is Always Female, a wonderful poem that I've used for a number of years called The Low Road. And it has a lot to do with what we're doing here this weekend: solidarity, integrating, pushing back, and also, hopefully, having a good time and laughing a little bit. The Low Road. What can they do to you? Whatever they want. They can set you up, they can bust you, they can break your fingers, they can burn your brain with electricity, blur you with drugs till you can't walk, can't remember. They can take your child. They can do anything. You can't stop them from doing. How can you stop them? Alone, you can fight, you can refuse, you can take what revenge you can, but they roll over you. But two people fighting back to back can cut through a mob. A snake dancing file can break a cordon. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds, and hold a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity and your own newsletter. 10,000 power and your own paper. 100,000 your own media. 10 million your own country. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again and they said no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean. And each day you mean one more. So let's remember to give one another hugs, smile, energy, solidarity, and laughter. Thank you very much.